Standing Committee on Indigenous and Northern Affairs. Pursuant to standing orders, today's meeting is in a hybrid format. I'd like to welcome everybody to our meeting. Now that we are in session, screenshots, photos, and recording is not allowed. For those participating virtually, hopefully our clerk went through everything. You have a choice of floor, English, or French on your controls, so please select your language of choice. And we will be having potentially questions in Inuktitut, and so you may want to make sure that you're ready for that if Ms. Edlund is joining us today. We're going to go through, get started pretty quickly. One of our witnesses has to leave just after 4:30. We might be able to squeeze a few more minutes for him, but I'd like to get into opening statements and then into at least the first round of 6-minute questions before we move to the second panel. So with that, on our first panel, I'd like to welcome Hayden Stenland as a student, Jordan Plain, who is the President, Youth Council Métis Nation of Ontario, welcome. And we also have Melanie Omenihu, President, Women of the Métis Nation. And so I think that Hayden, if you're ready, we'll start with you for your 5-minute opening statement. I do have a system, if the camera's on me, I give a yellow card, which is 30 seconds left, and a red card for end of time. And don't stop mid-sentence, so wind up your thoughts. And whenever you're ready, Hayden, we'll turn it over to you for your 5-minute opening, or up to 5-minute opening statement.
All righty. Can I begin?
The floor is yours. Please start.
Okay. Bon après-midi. Tansha. Dishine Caution Hayden Stenland. Apparenty se Lee McPherson, Lee Morriso, Lee O'Connor, Lee Triscoll, Paley Stenland. Kenora, Ontario, Newi Ken, Pekanora Dos Chin. I am 17 years old, I have cerebral palsy, and I am in grade 12 at St. Thomas Aquinas High School. I am a descendant of the half-breed adhesion to Treaty 3, and my ancestors are from the Northwestern Ontario Métis community in the traditional territory of Treaty 3, Rainy Lake, Rainy River, Lake of the Woods, and Lac Seul. The Métis are a distinct people with our own way of life and language, which is Michif. My family has strong roots in the Northwestern Ontario Métis community. My ancestors were present in the area prior to Canada being Canada. The Métis in Region 1 are grounded in our identity of who we are and where we come from as people. I've known my roots and Métis identity since birth. I have become a strong advocate for Métis rights and interests. I was raised within a Métis community myself, and I've been constantly surrounded by strong regional Métis leadership who've advocated and defended our Métis community. My older sister, Caitlin, and myself have been lucky enough to grow up within our Métis community since birth. My Métis family ensured we knew, understood, and protected our Métis identity and way of life. From an infant, I was brought on to the lands and waters of my traditional territory to receive teachings regarding my way of life. Because of this, I am proud, grounded, and aware of where I come from and who I am, of my very Métis roots as I know them. My mother, Regional Councillor Stenland, has always fought for the rights of our citizens in our area. She has taught me that my community is rooted in the facts of history, where our ancestors come from and our rights, interests, and claims, and that these are inherent rights that we have. The Crown knew that we were a distinct people in 1871 when the Dawson Route came through my territory, and Canada acknowledged the Métis in the community via the 1871 Half-Breeds of Fort Frances Dawson Pay List, on which one of my own ancestors is listed. In 1875, Canada again formally acknowledged the Métis community in northwestern Ontario by signing a treaty with us, a half-breed treaty, a Métis treaty. Canada made promises to our Métis community with our Métis treaty adhesion in 1875. Bill C-53 is a way for Canada to be honourable and treat our Métis communities the same way as First Nations communities with regards to being able to govern ourselves. The passing of Bill C-53 is more than just a legislative bill on paper. It's a way for Canada to treat us equitably and acknowledge how the Métis have already governed ourselves. The passing of Bill C-53 is an opportunity for Canada to finally and formally acknowledge our right to internal governance and our authority over our citizenship and election processes and Métis Child and Family Services. I shared my story as I personally believe that it's important for Canada to acknowledge and respect us so that our communities will have this legislation acknowledging us. How I was raised should not be compromised, and my mom and the MNO should not have to continually stand up for and defend the citizens and our communities. I strongly believe Métis self-government will help us maintain our way of life and allow us to govern ourselves in the Métis way for all of our future descendants. This is reconciliation in action. I implore you all to realize the significance of what you are voting on. Think of how you can impact our Métis families, communities, and our way of life. Our citizens, future generations should not have to turn to the courts to defend our people and communities. Canada needs to act swiftly, and this is your opportunity to pass this legislation to acknowledge our right to self-government. Marcy, miigwech. Thank you all. Kawapamitin.
Thank you, Mr. Senland, you're right on the mark there for the 5 minutes. Well done. Thank you for your opening comments. We're going to go to our other online witness. I always like to go while the technology is working. So Ms. Omenaho, and if I've pronounced your name incorrectly, please set me straight. And when you're ready, the floor is yours for 5 minutes.
Ashley, you've pronounced my name very well, and thank you for that. And before I start, I want to say how proud I am of Hayden. I've known Hayden since he was a very young man, and he does make my heart big. Good afternoon. My name is Melanie Omenhio, and I'm the president of Women of the Métis Nation, La Femme Chifo-Tepemswak. I'd like to acknowledge that I'm joining you today from Treaty 6 territory and the motherland of the Métis Nation. La Femme Chifo-Tepemswak is the national Métis women's organization that's democratically mandated to represent Métis women across the Métis Nation motherland. LFMO plays a significant role in enhancing the social, cultural, economic, and environmental and leadership space occupied by Métis women. We influence public policy and decision-making related to rights, priorities, concerns, and aspirations of Métis women within the Métis Nation and the Canadian governments. I'm here today speaking in favor of the passing of Bill C-53. Having reviewed the proposed bill, I'm heartened to see that after the signing in 2019 with Canada and the Métis governments of Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Ontario, the relationship will be formalized by the way of passing of Bill C-53. Métis people have long been seen as the free men. The Cree people gave us the name of Otipemisiwak, which were the people who governed and owned themselves. This bill recognizes and acknowledges that Métis people have the rights based on Section 35 of the Constitution in 1983 to actualize self-government. By the way of law, this will further define that Canada will interact with the specified Métis governments, recognizing their right to self-govern. This bill does not deal with land or land rights, as may have been heard through media. It speaks solely to the internal governance structures of the Otipemisiwak Métis government, the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan, and the Métis Nation of Alberta. It does not impact on other Indigenous people or other people who are Métis who are seeking their own rights. The bill recognizes the authority with respects to governance, operations, and things like child and family services. Further, Bill C-53 speaks to our self-determination on who is Métis. This bill has no adverse impacts on other Indigenous people. Métis rights are not subordinate to the rights of other Indigenous people. There's no hierarchy of Indigenous rights. This fact is spoken about within the Royal Commission on Aboriginal People and the Supreme Court of Canada, even in the Pauli decision. Within several recent examples of the swift passing of government bills on other Indigenous nations, I would expect that there would be no impediment to the swift passing of this act. Article 4 of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples states, Indigenous people in exercising their right to self-determination have the right to autonomy or self-government in matters relating to their internal and local affairs, as well as the ways and means for financing their autonomous functions. Further, the United Nations Declaration Act states that whereas the Government of Canada recognizes that all relations with Indigenous peoples must be based on the recognition and implementation of inherent right to self-determination, including the right of self-government. Bill C-53 is simply validating what the Government of Canada has already committed to in its relationship with Indigenous people. We speak strongly in favor of the work and look to offering our support with ongoing Métis gender-based intersectional analysis through the implementation of Bill C-53. It will take everyone's collective effort to make this process a success and to empower this historic bill to be a driving force to advance reconciliation in Canada. I look forward to joining with our other Métis Nation leaders to ensure that the swift passing of this bill supporting the Métis Nations of governments and advancing our reconciliation. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you for your opening comments. And now, Ms. Plain, we'll go to you in our room. And so whenever you're ready, just reset my clock. You have 5 minutes.
It turned on automatically?
Yeah, in the room, they'll control it for you.
Perfect. Thank you, Chair and members of the committee. I'm Jordan Plain, the President of the Métis Nation of Ontario Youth Council and the Youth Representative on the Provisional Council of the Métis Nation of Ontario. I'm a descendant of Margaret de Somme of Penetangwisheen, a historic community along the shores of Georgian Bay. My community has a rich and long history of self-governing Métis people. We are rights-bearing community members of the Métis community of Georgian Bay under Section 35 and have an inherent and constitutional right to self-government. My Métis ancestors were forced off of their lands, but always maintained their community around the Upper Great Lakes. Today, we celebrate our heritage through vibrant community councils, gatherings, youth cultural programming, Métis music and art, and our traditional ways of life. We also celebrate the stories that connect First Nations and Métis people. It is essential that we remember our shared history and the waters of Georgian Bay that hold the spirit of our ancestors, and they continue to inspire us today. That said, since the introduction of this legislation, misinformation has been spreading about Métis communities driven by some Métis and First Nations leadership, and as a result, Ontario Métis students and young people are now living in fear of online misinformation and being subject at some points to harassment at schools. It is not that Métis youth are questioning our identity. We are strong in our connections to our community and to our culture. It is our youth like Hayden Stenlin, who spoke previously, who are continuing to pick up the fight of our ancestors and ensuring that future generations find themselves better off than we are today. This newfound concern stems from those who seek to undermine our very existence and leave us wondering and anxious if tomorrow might bring more hurtful accusations and questioning how we can respond to this lateral violence. While the Métis have always faced prejudice, our generation grew up at a time when Métis rights were affirmed by the Supreme Court of Canada. For the past 20 years, we have had rights recognition that was denied to our ancestors. In some cases, even instructors and professors are attacking Ontario youth on social media. In other cases, Métis young people are being bullied at schools. This is having a negative psychological impact on Métis youth. We cannot allow political division to damage the relationships between First Nations and Métis people in what is now Canada. As we all work together to walk the path of reconciliation together, we need to focus on the common grounds we share. We found plenty of this on issues like climate change, education, equitable access to healthcare, and the need to take action on missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. But we must also support one another in advancing our respective self-governments. Bill C-53 will not only empower Métis governments to protect Métis children and families in the welfare system, it will ensure that Métis youth get a real say in programs and services provided by our Métis governments. Bill C-53 will allow youth to have a voice. It will empower our young people to be in the dialogue with our Métis leadership and uplift our voices around shaping the laws and policies of our Métis government. It provides us with the autonomy to ensure that our people are taken care of in a way that is respective and representative of our own culture and our ways of knowing. This legislation is truly reconciliation in action, and it enshrines in law the Section 35 rights that our people were promised many years ago. My ancestors and past leadership have fought for our right to self-govern and determine our collective paths forward. We have a historic opportunity to finish the work of our ancestors and build a Métis government that is rooted in our ways of knowing, being, and culture. My Métis ancestors started to paddle the canoe forward in our journey towards self-government, and it is now the responsibility of Canada and our leadership to safeguard this journey for future generations. I ask for your support in Bill C-53 to ensure not only that the people of today have protected rights of self-government, but my children, my children's children, and future generations are self-governing Métis people. Thank you. Merci.
Thank you for your opening statements, everyone. I have a quick question. Ms. Stenland, Teresa, I just want to clarify if you're willing or able to accept questions as well. There has been a question put to me. I know that you're here in support of your son, but the question was asked if you're able to or willing to take questions as well today.
I'd be glad to take questions as well.
Okay.
Today's Hayden's Day, but if not, I'm also willing to take questions on behalf of the community and the MNO.
As a mother, I appreciate that clarification. So, colleagues, let's get into it. First up, I have Mr. Vidal, who has 6 minutes. When you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I want to thank all of the witnesses for being here today as we consider this important piece of legislation and trying to find our way to a good outcome. Ms. Plain, I'm going to start with you, and hopefully I'll get to everybody a little bit here through my time. You had an article in the Toronto Star here just in the last couple of days, which, it's very similar to a lot of the points you made today in your presentation, so I'm not pulling anything out of here that's not what you probably just said as well. I think it's pretty common information you shared. And I'm going to just quote from the article, and again, it reflects what you said. First Nations and Métis in Ontario are supposed to be walking this path to reconciliation together, yet each day it feels more and more like a feeding frenzy. Some First Nations leaders are pitting us against one another, and that's just one of the paragraphs in there. Now, today, in fairness, you did clarify, and part of my question was going to be that it's not just First Nations leaders. There's other Métis leaders. There's other Métis organizations, the MMF. There's been letters written by the MNS and MNBC that have challenged the MNO leadership on some of the membership stuff and some of that. So I'm sure you're aware of all that. I guess my question around all of this and the importance of this legislation and some of the controversy that's happening between different groups, especially in Northern Ontario, would be around consultation. Like, do you think there was enough consultation, or you talk about misinformation? Well, was there enough provision of accurate information to all of the parties involved in all of this to avoid some of the conflict, avoid some of the accusations, avoid some of the challenges that we're facing now? Like, was an adequate job done in creating the relationship and providing information to all the parties that are now being concerned about some of the things going on?
Thank you for your question. And I think, thank you, first of all, I guess, for reading the article. Very much appreciated. I think that last Thursday, some of our previous presidents did speak to some of the consultation. But one of the things I want to highlight around the misinformation, I can speak directly to an incident that's happening in my home community around how this misinformation is actually directly affecting young people due to the misinformation that we've seen both in media, on Parliament Hill previously. This misinformation is trickling down to young people through their local leadership, through their parents, and it's now trickling into schools where our neighboring First Nations communities are coming into schools and fighting with Métis children because of this misinformation. The MNO has done an incredible job to put out what is the information surrounding this bill, and the information is out there around exactly the aims of this bill, and as we've all previously spoken about, the exact targets of it. But I think the MNO has done an incredible job at putting out what is the facts of this bill.
Thank you. I guess maybe just to drill a little bit further on that, do you think the government has done enough to educate people on this? I mean, this is a piece of legislation that, as we clarified on Thursday, I think, and the analyst clarified for me again today, that if we pass this legislation, future treaties don't have to come back to Parliament, that they can be approved by order in council, which may, in lay terms means that Cabinet can just approve future treaties. And in fairness, there's been lots of talk about, you know, passing this quickly, like we've done all the other kind of pieces of self-government legislation in the past, but there's never been a piece of self-government legislation that takes this approach. Yeah. This is the first of a kind. Mm-hmm. And for it to not have to come back to Parliament later is creating some concern for many people. So I guess in the context of that, do you think the government did enough to educate maybe some of the First Nations people that you're dealing with this conflict?
Mm-hmm. With all due respect, I think this is a long time coming, this bill. We have been self-governing, and we have engaged in these conversations for a long time. And so I think some of those questions might be better answered by some of the technical team. I'm not here to speak about some of the concerns around the kind of like the process and the tree, but I can speak to how this has affected young people and the dire need to have young people's voices included in our self-government. And that's exactly what this bill is going to do, is ensure that young people are empowered in those dialogues, because right now I think of our funding agreements and how they're heavily reliant on federal and provincial funds, and at any time, in theory, they could be yanked, where if we are in conversation with that, we get to determine how funds are spent and in a way that is representative of Métis people.
Fighting the automatic people here. Thank you for that. I'm going to move on. I don't have much time left. I'm going to move on to Ms. Stenlin, and if you want Hayden to answer it, that's fine, but I'm going to ask you the question in relation to an article that you actually put out, I believe it was in the Hill Times just a few days ago as well, and it's a little bit similar to what I just asked Ms. Plain, is that you say that Métis are only asking to be treated the same as other Indigenous people who have seen their self-government legislation passed swiftly and respectfully. And again, like I say in the Library of Parliament's legislative summary to us, it's very clear that this legislation is very different than any of the other prior pieces of self-government legislation. So when you ask for this to be passed quickly and swiftly, are you suggesting that parliamentarians or this committee should not execute our kind of democratic responsibility to carefully consider the legislation that will, like, this is really significant in the future of the Government of Canada's relationship with Métis people, and are you asking us not to do our due diligence in that respect?
And we are at the end of the 6 minutes. I'll give you just an opportunity for a brief response, and there could be a chance to come back to that, but a brief answer would be appreciated. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. What I'm saying is the Métis have been self-governing for generations. Hayden gave a quick synopsis of our history and of who we are and where we come from. There's no hierarchy in the Constitution, and the other Indigenous peoples are self-governing. We're just asking Canada to formally recognize us on paper for what we've already been doing for generations.
Good, thank
you. It's a long time coming, and we're just asking Canada to move on that.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Stenlin, I'll point out for this round we have 18 minutes left, and so please stay with us as long as you can. I'm getting some anxiety about you missing your bus, so just when you need to go, feel free to hang up and leave, and I'll just thank you now. But please feel free to stay as long as we can. And with that, we're going to move over to Mr. Carr for his 6 minutes.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. Mr. Stenlin, I'm going to direct my question to you. And I want to start by saying how wonderful it was to listen to your presentation here today. As members of the committee know, I'm a former high school teacher and high school principal myself. And to see young leaders articulate with such passion and intellect on behalf of an issue that's important to them is really inspiring. So thanks for being here. One of the questions that I would like to ask is, from your own experience, what role do you believe that youth and students, particularly in secondary, so in grades 9 to 12, can play in advancing the rights of Indigenous peoples? One way, of course, that can be done is you can appear as a witness in front of a parliamentary committee, although that is not something that happens particularly often. So it's a privileged position, certainly, for us to be able to listen to you and the opportunity for you to speak to us. But beyond the confines of Parliament, what are the ways in which you think that people of your generation, whether that's in your community, your school, across the province or the country, can advocate for advancing the rights of Indigenous peoples?
I think that we can practice our way of life and show people that and be proud of who we are and tell people who we are. We shouldn't be afraid to show our Métis identities. We should be involved in our communities. We should speak our languages of Michif proudly, and we shouldn't be afraid to show our personality. We shouldn't be afraid to show our identity, and we shouldn't be afraid to practice our very way of life, which we practiced for centuries without formal recognition from the Crown. And I think we deserve that.
Mr. Stanley, I'm going to follow up if I can. Your colleague here, Ms. Plain, had talked about an increase in both real and perceived fear, particularly online, in regards to this particular debate. Are you able to share, if you're comfortable, and I know that this could be a difficult topic, so certainly feel free to say, I'd like to pass, but would you be able to comment on whatever personal experiences you have had or those around you have had in relation to some of the anxieties and fears that Ms. Plain raised a few moments ago?
We should not, well, one of my fears is that we're treated differently than First Nations. We are not given the resources that First Nations people are. We aren't really considered as First Nations people are. We're sort of cast aside when we shouldn't be. If we say we're Indigenous, and this is my personal opinion, we are saying the truth. I mean, it's not like we're a minority group. We've been around for centuries, decades, multiple generations, and we're not going to go away anytime soon. So I think we need to be considered.
Thanks very much, Mr. Stenlin. Ms. Plain, perhaps I'll just direct the same question to you. Not the second one, because you, I think, answered that in part in your opening statement, but the first one, which was just, can you talk about the ways in which Métis youth across the country can exercise their leadership in the capacity of advancing Indigenous rights for peoples across the country? What are some of the ways that you think youth can do that? And is there a role for the federal government to be supportive in those endeavors?
Absolutely. I think for young people to stand up and be proud to be Métis. The previous week, you've heard a lot about Métis were once known as the forgotten people. What I'm seeing amongst young leadership in Ontario and across the motherland is that no longer are you sitting quiet and hiding. We are the ones leading the way. Be proud of who we are. We are raised in a beautiful culture and community, and for folks to stand tall in that and speak their truth, it's not easy. We've seen that, but it's worth it.
I'm curious to know if you could elaborate. What's changed? You say no longer, which implies that there was a time where perhaps youth were feeling less vocal or less engaged than perhaps you and your generation are now. Where do you think the shift occurred? What's behind that?
I think more people are talking about Métis communities and families. I think it's something that's super common now. I look around, I come from a community that represents 25% of the citizens and Métis citizens in Ontario, and we are engaging in dialogue from itty-bitties all the way up to our elders, and it's no longer something that folks are hiding. More and more people are coming to gatherings and engaging in dialogue that way.
Well, thanks very much. And itty bitties. I was in education a long time, and I have not heard that term. I'm going to bring that. I'm bringing that back to Manitoba. The itty bitties.
Perfect.
Thank you, Mr. Stenlund. Thanks very much for your participation, and kudos to you for taking time out of your day to participate in the democratic process in support of something that means a lot to you. So, thanks very much.
Great, thank you. We're going to go now to Madame Berube. Vous avez 6 minutes.
You have 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. I'd like to thank the witnesses who are in attendance today and those appearing remotely. My question is for Ms. Plain. In an opinion letter published in the Toronto Star on Saturday, you said that Métis youth felt discouraged and anxious. You also referred to the polarisation and increasing partisan issues affecting the Métis people. Could you please clearly indicate what your concerns are regarding Métis youth to the committee members, please?
Absolutely. Merci pour ton question.
Yes, thank you for your question.
I should also note I'm also a registered social worker. I work in a psychiatric hospital in my home community, and this is where the intersection of my elected position and my social work position all come into play, is I have conversations on a daily basis with young people around how they are affected by this misinformation. My community in particular, the Georgian Bay community, has been called into question. We've been called frauds, not real, or not actually existent, and you don't know what that does to a person until you see it in big, bold letters, in academic articles, in newspapers. To see your community be called out as your family history feels as if it's erased. And that's what makes people anxious, is what's next? If we're going to see these questions and these call-outs happen, what's next? We don't know. But what I can assure you is that Métis young people across Ontario, we know who we are. We are proud, and we are born and raised in our communities, as Hayden shared earlier. And that is something that is unequivocal and firm for Métis young people, which helps with the anxiety.
What impact will this bill have on Métis youth, in your opinion?
How won't this impact Métis youth, I think, is the real question. This will fundamentally impact young people in every single way. One of the beautiful things that all of our Métis governments have engaged in is ensuring that young people are at the center of every dialogue that happens. When we think about our laws, our policies, the way that our child welfare system could be shaped, our mental health supports, young people are in those conversations. And this bill moving forward would empower young people to continue in those dialogues, to not shape a Métis nation for ourselves, but for the future generations, for my children, my children's children.
Now, Mr. Stenlund, as a student, and hats off for taking part in the committee's deliberations today, you were daring and to be here. Now, what are your misgivings and concerns when it comes to Métis youth?
I am concerned that some people don't think that we are an actual Indigenous group, and some people don't believe us when we say we are Métis, and we should be proud of who we are. We should be able to say without repercussion that we are Indigenous, and that we have an identity, and that we have a way of life, and that we are strong, proud Métis people who have a culture, who have a language, which is Michif, who have jigging, who have fiddling, who have ways that we should just be recognized. I mean, we shouldn't be cast aside. We should have a voice at the table.
I have a question for Mr. Stelland and Ms. Plain. What do these young Métis people, when they become adults in the current context, and what intergenerational repercussions does that have when this kind of thing occurs?
First, I'm going to thank Hayden, and you can go and catch your school bus now, Hayden, so you can disconnect and head off. Thanks. For the question, the intergenerational effects that this could have, as you heard my son speak, he knows where he came from. He's been raised within a Métis community. His ancestors before him knew who they were. Canada formally recognized us. With Canada delaying this, it puts into the question of, as Hayden just spoke, who are we as a people? Are we a real people? We know we are. We're recognized in the Constitution. And yet Canada is delaying formally recognizing our right, our inherent right to self-government. And you need to move forward. Treat us equitably.
J'ai une dernière question.
I do have a final question for you, Ms. Amenilio. What does recognition mean in the eyes of women in Métis communities?
Thank you for the question. Actually, I'd like to tell you that for many women in our communities, it means that their roles are much more significant. We come from a strong egalitarian society where women were a significant part of all the things that we did. And you can even see that in the leadership that exists within the Métis Nation, and how many of our leaders are actually Métis women who are holding strong and pushing forward on Métis rights. And we proudly stand with them and support them. And Métis women, more than anybody, have known the sacrifices that have been made when we become a part of the forgotten people. So I know that most Métis women that we've consulted with and engaged with are very supportive of this legislation. And I would also tell you, I come from Alberta. There has been an extensive amount of consultation and engagement around Constitution and what self-governance means. And since I'm no longer a young person, but since I was a very young person and my mother used to take me to Métis meetings, and I even went to Métis meetings with my grandmother, we talked about self-government. People wanted self-governance. So it has been decades for us to get to this point. And I think that the important part is moving forward. And we're not here to try to deny anybody else their rights. But I would tell you that we have not been engaged on other Indigenous self-government legislation with other Indigenous people. It wasn't a requirement. And I do appreciate that there is a lot of processes involved within the Government of Canada in how legislation gets passed and what treaties do. But those are processes that the government controls. We have no control over any of those matters.
Thank you. We're at the end of our 6 minutes there. Now we'll go to Ms. Idlut. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson, and thank you to the witnesses. It is always a pleasure to hear what you have to say, and the youth as well. The youth delivered his speech really well, and Teresa, I am so proud of your son, and though he is still going to high school, he is already showing signs of leadership. I want to ask every one of you if you can respond to my question. Now, considering if Bill C-53 was passed in Alberta and Ontario and Saskatchewan, when the Métis have their own government, now having self-government, when you have a self-government, you will be able to pass bylaws and what kind of legislation would you like to see in the Constitution? As a self-governing people in Ontario Alberta and Saskatchewan, what kind of legislation would you like to see for Métis to be able to govern themselves? Thank you.
What kinds of laws would you like those self-governing nations make? Like, we're assuming that by having self-government, that will naturally lead to those self-governments making laws. What kinds of laws would you like to see those nations making that will have impacts on Métis peoples in each of the nations that will be impacted?
Yep, perfect. Thank you. I wish I could sit here and answer that, but I think one thing that was raised earlier, we need to consult with our people. We need to talk to them about what laws they want to see. It's not up to me. It's up to the people. We listen, we sit, we learn, and then we go back and make those decisions. I wish I could sit here today and list off 50 different laws I would love to see, but I'd be misspeaking because I know young people love to be in dialogue, and that's what we plan on doing. We want to have that dialogue in order to make those decisions. And I can guarantee you, young people will be at the center of those dialogues.
Maybe we'll go to Ms. Omenaho next, and then to Ms. Stenlin when Ms. Omenaho is done.
So for us, there are a significant number of laws and things that need to be done that once self-government is implemented will be within the control of our Métis governments to institute. Things like decisions and laws based on family and children services and how to care for our families and children in a reformed manner from what exists today so that we don't have high numbers of kids in care. We need to start looking at laws that are going to help us be more effective around the justice system. So not only that we don't become victims of justice, but that we don't have the highest incarceration rates within the criminal justice system, and that we're able to help become an effective government to help deal with some of the issues that we're facing within these justice systems. There are many different laws. I agree with what's already been said. There's too many to think, but I mean, the problem is that they need the tools and resources now to be able to start to institute those things and push and work with other governments to be able to change things so that there is a better future for our children and our youth.
Thank you to the two previous speakers. I just want to remind everyone that we have inherent rights. And our rights come from the communities. And we will need to go out, as Jordy mentioned, and consult with our communities and our citizens. And there will be different levels of jurisdiction and authority. There'll be regional, within the Métis Nation of Ontario, there'll be regional jurisdictions and authorities and laws. Then there'll also be provincial jurisdictions and authorities of different levels, different matters. But all of that is going to come from the people and our communities, and they will be the ones providing us the direction in regards to the laws and the jurisdictions and authorities that we set forward under our own self-government.
There's 30 seconds left. Okay, we're good. All right, well, that takes us to the end of the time. Unfortunately, the votes cut into our meeting time today, and we have one more panel to hear, so we're going to have to end it here. I'd like to thank each of our witnesses, and Ms. Stenlin, if you could pass along our gratitude once again to your son for all of you being here and for him joining us. With that, we're going to suspend and bring in the next panel, and then we'll get started, and we'll do opening statements and then one round of questions, and that will take us near the end of the time we have today. So, colleagues, we're suspended. We'll be back shortly. All right, colleagues, we're back. I'd like to welcome our second panel. And first of all, we have David Paul Achneepineskum, Chief Executive Officer. So welcome. And Chief Greg Desjardins with the Confederacy of Treaty 6 First Nations. So welcome to both of you. You'll have 5 minutes each. And for your opening statements, and we'll get into probably one round of 6 minutes questions, 24 minutes in total. And that will likely take us to about the end of the time we have today. So, Mr. Achneepineskum, if you'd like to start, I'll turn it over to you. And I don't know if you can see me. If the camera's on me, I hold up a yellow card when there's 30 seconds left and a red card when the time's up, but just finish your thought. Don't stop mid-sentence. So when you're ready, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
My name is David Paul Achneepineskum. I'm the Matawa Chief Executive Officer, also a member of Martin Falls First Nation. I am presenting today on behalf of Matawa First Nations Management and the Matawa Chiefs Council. There was very limited advance notice of these standing committee hearings, but only a few hours given to confirm our participation here today, but we are here. The Matawa Chiefs Council represents the 9 First Nations of Aralan, Cossos Lake, Yabington, Kanogaming, Long Lake 58, Martin Falls, Ibanamik, Mishkanaga, and Webekwe. The Matawa First Nations has a population of 10,864 as of March 2023. The Matawa traditional territories and homelands are known around the world as the Ring of Fire region. Canada and North America's emerging lone source of chromite and other critical minerals, nickel, gold, and silver, that is going to be required to reposition Canada and its allies in the new green economy. On June 21, 2023, the day Bill C-53 was introduced and referred a second reading. The Matawa Chiefs Council issued a letter to the Governor General of Canada, Her Excellency, the Right Honorable Mary Simon, calling on her to respond and protect the rights and interests of our First Nations.
Sorry, I'm going to have to jump in here for a second. I'm going to stop the clock. Your sound quality has deteriorated quite significantly, and I'm having problems hearing you, and I think our interpreters are having problems. So I'll get you to do another quick sound check. We'll do a check. Tell us about the weather. And yeah, we may need to get you to move the mic, but I'll turn it over to our clerk to get you sorted out. And then we can hopefully resume with good sound quality. So to our clerk.
Hello.
Hi. I'm so sorry, Chief. We will let's test your sound. The connectivity is good, so at least we know it's not the internet that's causing the trouble. So it's probably something that we can fix.
David Paul Achneepineskum. I'm from Thunder Bay, and the weather here is nice and cold. We are getting ready for the fall weather. It's the best time of the year for us.
We could try, sir, if you could lift your mic, maybe it can get it that way, or just make sure that is his headphone selected? Yeah. Okay. Just trying to troubleshoot everything that we can think of.
Yeah, I haven't moved my mic since we tested last. So, are you hearing me? Again, this is David Paul Achneepineskum on Thunder Bay. The weather here is nice. It's nice, cool weather. Looking forward to the nice fall season. We're all good here to whatever.
I'm just looking. I'm looking at the interpreters, trying to get a signal from them. She says to continue talking. So I know, sir, you've got some papers in front of you. If I could just ask you not to flip through your papers when you're talking, if you could sort of lay them flat.
Yeah, that's where they were when I was talking. They were on the phone, right here on the table. So we're ready to go. The weather here is nice, and hopefully we can enjoy the weather coming weekend. Are you hearing me good?
Yes, we are hearing you well. Thank you very much.
Okay, yeah, apologies for that. It was good. Speak nice and loud and clearly, and we should be able to get through this. So you have 30 minutes and 20 seconds left on the clock. Please continue where you left off.
Okay. Okay, Matawa is formally submitting this letter to the Standing Committee. On Thursday, October 26th, the Standing Committee heard testimony from the Métis Nations of Ontario, Saskatchewan, and Alberta that Bill C-53 only impacts the Métis people, and there's no trigger of the duty to consult with First Nations on this proposed legislation. It is the Matawa position that the Métis Nations are not consent providers of our peoples, nor are they appropriate legal advisors to be providing such high legal determinations and advice to your committee. In this irresponsible capacity, the Métis Nations are acting as enforcers of colonialism mechanisms and court decisions in their own interests. Canada has not informed First Nations of the impacts of Bill C-53. Bill C-53 Section 8 recognition raises the Métis Nations to the definition of Indigenous governing body. It is the Matawa position that the Métis, specifically in Ontario, are not the constitutional equals of original inhabitants of this land, a role held only by First Nations and Inuit. The Métis Nation, the Matawa Chiefs Council recommend to the Standing Committee that a formal analysis be conducted by the Department of Justice as to the impacts of C-53 on Section 35, rights of the land rights holding Indigenous consent providers in Canada, the Inuit and the First Nations who are treaty, non-treaty, and modern treaty right holders. It is the Matawa position that Bill C-53 will impact our Section 35 Aboriginal treaty rights, including aspects of community governance, traditional jurisdictions, and lands and resources. The Matawa Chiefs Council submit to the Standing Committee the Métis Nation of Ontario zone map that is publicly available on their website. As shown on the map, the Métis Nation of Ontario publicly makes unsubstantiated claims into the James Bay Treaty No. 9 boundaries and the traditional territories of the Matawa member First Nations. The Matawa Chiefs Council also recommends that the Departments of Justice, Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs, and the Indigenous Services Canada provide an impact analysis or definition on the parameters for the term distinctions-based approach. Bill C-53 will eliminate the distinctions-based approach between First Nations, Inuit, and the Métis that has previously been a safeguard to distinguishing and protecting established land rights and interests of First Nations and Inuit peoples of Canada. Our land and our resources rights and all current co-developed legislative initiatives on policing, health, family, and child welfare, and the upcoming negotiations of the United States Declaration Act will be impacted by Bill C-53. Another ignored impact of Bill C-53 will also be in the Impact Assessment Act that has been successfully challenged by the Alberta as unconstitutional. It is the Matawa position that the list impacts of Bill C-53 on First Nations of Canada has been minimized and ignored.
If I could ask you to make your closing statement, thank you.
In closing, this Liberal government is engaging in responsible Crown legislative conduct by advancing Bill C-53. What we are witnessing in Canada is pitting First Nations against Métis people to protect Section 35 rights and interests of our children and future generations. Miigwech. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And now we'll go to Chief Desjardins. When you're ready, the floor is yours and you'll have 5 minutes.
I want to thank the committee members for giving us from the Confederacy of Treaty 6 Western Canada a chance to address some issues related to Bill C-53. I am a treaty chief from the Frog Lake Cree Nation, which is part of the Treaty Number 6. Our ancestors entered into a peace and friendship treaty with the British Crown in 1876 to allow her subjects to live in our territories. It is important for us to stress that we never gave up our lands and resources. Our ancestors allowed the Crown subjects to live in our territories, not to own them. We will have prepared a written submission for the committee. I will not read it, but rather speak on a few points and leave time for questions. This is a Liberal government bill. It is not a bill based on consent of the treaty peoples. We have to remember that Parliament controls this bill. In the future, if you want to change or amend or repeal the legislation, it is the right of Parliament. Our treaty rights are not controlled by Parliament. We have noted that there is no implementation plan. How is the government going to reconcile conflicting interests? We ask these questions coming from Alberta. We're going to raise an issue that is unique to Alberta. The government of Alberta during the 1930s worldwide depression created 8 unique Métis settlements. The province of Alberta set aside lands for Métis for their use. These settlements are not part of the Métis Nation of Alberta's constitutional structure. However, the Constitution does contain language that if the Métis settlements in the near future want to be part of the Métis Nation, they can negotiate their way into the Métis government. This is set out in Chapter 19 of the Constitution with a very strange clause stating that the Métis settlements will continue as created by Alberta. In effect, the federal legislation will create another structure of Métis within Alberta, one recognized by the province and one recognized by the federal government. The situation is really setting up a future conflict of laws. The Alberta legislation clearly states that anyone who is recognized by federal legislation is not entitled to be a member of the Métis settlement. There are a number of court cases that have reached the same conclusion. We are wondering what the Alberta government has told the members of the committee about the apparent conflict. If the province has occupied the field as under Section 92, what is the federal jurisdiction going to do? How does industry and other agencies react when consultation is required? Does industry follow federal definition of Métis as set out in the Supreme Court of Canada decision in Powley? Or does industry follow the province of Alberta's definition as set out in Alberta law? Does Bill C-53 override any provincial legislation? If it does, then the legislation should be clear. We have a number of questions. If the process based on the right of free, prior, informed consent, how does the government determine those criteria? Number 2, the province of Alberta does not appear to have been engaged in this legislation process. How is the federal government going to reconcile the 2 separate definitions of Métis? Question mark. Who will decide? Question mark. Number 3, does Canada appears to be creating chaos rather than reconciliation? The chiefs in Alberta issued a statement on Bill C-53, which is attached to our presentation. I quote, "The chiefs of Alberta call on the federal government to abandon this bill that we perceive as ill-conceived and divisive. The honor of the Crown is not upheld when Canada creates legislation that disregards our treaties. The inherent and treaty rights guaranteed to our people are not subject to change or renegotiation. That must be upheld for as long as the sun shines, the grass grows, and the rivers flow. As sovereign nations, our chiefs are standing up for our treaties and for our future generations. We cannot allow Bill C-53 to create a precedent for revisiting and undermining treaty agreements and the treaty rights they guarantee. We commend the members to read.
Great, thank you. We'll get right now into the rounds of questions. And first up, I have Mr. Schmale, who will have 6 minutes.
Okay, thank you, Chair, and thank you, witnesses. I have a ton of questions and not enough time, so maybe I will pick up where you left off, Mr. Desjardins. If we could talk about some of the comments you made there just a few moments ago. Last meeting, we had representatives from Métis Alberta here, and they had specifically said that a member of, say, Fort McKay or the Métis settlements not necessarily had to be a member of MNA. And you, I think if I heard correctly, you said they did. Can you maybe clarify?
Well, I think what's happening, if you hold a status or a Bill C, which is created by the government, you're not allowed to live on the Métis settlements. And what we're saying is this issue was already dealt with in the 1930s with the creation of the settlements.
Yeah, because I think they were talking about the membership. MNA was saying you don't necessarily have to be a member to be on a settlement. And I do get your point, the provincial and federal difference. I just also, while we're speaking here, want to just kind of push back a little and try to flush this out in terms of what we're hearing from the Métis side when we're talking about a piece of legislation that deals with their self-governance only. The Métis, as we heard in our last meeting, are saying this piece of legislation does not affect First Nations at all. It's more of a self-governing piece of legislation to allow, and if you heard our panel previous, to talk about basically the authority to keep doing what they've been doing in the past. But your statements just now contradicted that.
Yeah, I think my comment was about the membership. And, I believe also the land. When we're fighting over a territory, then we have an issue. We also have a traditional territory here that the Métis settlements, now the Métis Nation now claim. And when you're using those words treaty and inherent right, that's very offensive to us when the federal government can't even uphold our treaty.
So I guess that's one of the things we're also trying to look into and get clarification on. It's our understanding as this legislation stands, and I do invite comment from our friend from Mattawa as well. It's the potential that after this self-governing piece of legislation, the treaty process starts, and the treaty process will involve consultation, but potentially not come before Parliament for final ratification. Is that your understanding as well?
All right, maybe I can speak first. Thank you. As far as we're concerned, self-government leads to a lot of things. Eventually, it's going to, as we mentioned in our brief, going to lead to lands and resources. Going to lead to getting our peoples together. And we don't want that. I mean, if, as far as we're concerned, we are the rightful landholders in our treaty territory, and we want to keep it that way.
Arlene, did you want to comment? You're on mute, sorry.
I'll address that in the written. I think there's just kind of too many points to discuss, but same thing. We hold that position. We are the treaty and inherent right holders.
I'm not, I will mess up your name. I do apologize. Our friend from Mattawa. Are there any amendments to this piece of legislation that you would like to see added to make it more acceptable to the people you represent?
No, there is no. First of all, we do not support the bill C-53, and therefore we're not going to recommend that there is going to be any amendments to it at all. We're totally, as our friend, from Treaty 6 stated, we are the rightful landholders, and we inherit the land from our ancestors, and that's the way we would like to keep it.
Oh, sorry. When you talk about land and resources, what can you dig into that a little further? Can you give us some of your concerns about that part? What do you think that means, and what are your concerns?
Well, we talk about the Ring of Fire development. That's potentially is going to happen, within the next decade. As far as we're concerned, as First Nations people of the land, the treaty right holders, we are solely responsible within our land, and it will be up to us, to negotiate with these industries to benefit our peoples of the land. It's if you start to, as far as I'm concerned, Canada and Ontario has, messed up our treaties since 1905, 1906, and it's, we don't want that to happen anymore. And we would like to remain as the rightful landholders and benefit from those resources. And the Ring of Fire development is the biggest mining development that's going to happen here in Canada. And we are the rightful beneficiaries to that.
Okay, thank you. We're out of time there, so we're going to go to our next questions, which is Mr. Batiste, who will have 6 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you for the First Nations chiefs and leaders who are presenting to us today. We've heard testimony from the co-drafters of this legislation that nothing in this legislation actually uses the words lands or resources or impacts First Nations lands or resources. Can you point me to the clause that you guys believe that where there's a misconception somewhere that this actual legislation delegates any land or resources or any kind of notion of lands and resources within this legislation? Either one of you.
There's really nothing in there, but certainly, you talk about self-government and then it just leads to something else along the way,
So if I can ask, so it's not necessarily this legislation that you have issues with, what comes after possibly?
No. We have the issues with this legislation right from the start.
Can you show me?
Because it's going to lead to other things. So why have this legislation in the first place if it's going to lead to other legislation that will impact our lands and resources, our treaty rights, etc.
So just to be clear, though, it's what comes after this legislation is what you're concerned about the lands and resources once this legislation comes into effect?
No, this legislation shouldn't come into effect at all. It shouldn't have been set at all.
Okay, Chief Desjardins, could you point to anywhere in the legislation that actually speaks to lands or resources?
Well, I think in Alberta we're already having issues. When the government lumps Inuit, First Nations, and Métis into one, you know what? We stand a treaty position all the time. So it's easier to deal with the Métis Nation and it seems to be a divisive tactic, and that's why we say that we're calling on the federal government to abandon the bill.
Yeah. So one of the key points made by some of the presidents of the Métis legislation is that there are a lot of people out there who claim to represent Métis from all across Canada. Some are legitimate, some are not factual in law. And they said it's important for us to actually have a piece of legislation that recognizes the importance of ensuring that we see which Métis are actually legitimate Métis, recognized by the courts, recognized by, their province, some provinces, and some do not. Do you not see value in government legislation that recognizes the valid Métis as opposed to those that aren't?
I guess if I could take a stab at that, I guess it would be under whose definition, the Métis settlements or the Métis Nation or the province or the feds, and I think, it hurts how fast you're trying to push this bill when us as First Nations, we're being told on a lot of bills, and many of them you can't even find 2 sentences of First Nations input, and that really hurts. Where we're supposed to have, a treaty, a peace and friendship treaty, and that's why our position is to abandon the bill.
Can you just go into a little bit about that? What clause in the legislation do you believe impacts your treaty rights?
Well, I believe this is going to open the door for more division.
So nothing within the current legislation, but what could happen after the legislation is passed is your concern, correct?
Well, when you look at Alberta and the Métis Nation and all the offices across the province, and now we're confined to our reserves and to our traditional territory, but we're going after the same land now. And when my treaty territory and land is in question, then we're very concerned.
Okay. Under the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, they have several clauses about identity, around self-determination. Do you believe that UNDRIP should apply to the Métis of Canada?
Can I answer? Didn't get a chance to answer your previous question there.
I don't have much time, so
as far as I'm concerned, this legislation, that Bill C-53, does not define who the Métis are.
Mm-hmm.
Like it seems to me, it's up to Métis Nation of Ontario to define their own members who they are. Whereas, as Indigenous status people, we are defined within the legislation under the Indian Act. So that kind of defines us. So it's a free-for-all, as far as I can see in this Bill 53. Anybody can claim to be a Métis.
Okay. So your concern is around the possibly opening up to a lot of different Métis who don't have the proper ancestral lineage. Is that the concern?
It is happening right now with the Métis Nation of Ontario. It's first of all, anyone that declares I'm a Métis can be a member, and it's really there's no real definition, and I'm sure that happens across all in Alberta as well. So it's a self-determinating kind of a Métis, or who defining who yourself are.
Okay,
So
Mr. Batiste, we're out of time. I do need to move to my next member. Maintenant, Madame Berube, vous avez 6 minutes.
Ms. Berube, 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairperson. I'd like to thank the witnesses for being here today around the committee table and remotely. My question is for both witnesses. Under Bill C-53, we know that its enactment might compromise the reconciliation which is underway with First Nations. What do you think of that statement?
I'm sorry, I had issues with the sound here.
Should I repeat that, Mr. Chairperson? Says Madame Berube.
Yeah, do you have the interpretation set if you need it? I've stopped the clock just so we can get the question repeated. So, Madame Berube.
Testing 1, 2, 3. This is the English channel. Testing 1, 2, 3. This is the English channel. Testing 1, 2, 3. This is the English channel. Testing 1, 2, 3. This is the English channel. Testing 1, 2, 3.
Looks like we're good to go, so let's do the question again, and then I'll start the clock.
So, Bill C-53. Some of us are hearing that this legislation will compromise reconciliation, which is underway with the First Nations. What would your reaction be to that assertion?
I certainly agree with that. It's, reconciliation is being set back under this legislation. And the trust that, is going to be lost. And it's so unfortunate, but it seems to me that it's underhanded, but the Liberal government to try and force this upon upon us as First Nations. We certainly, reconciliation, as far as I'm concerned, is dead because of this introduction of the Bill C-53.
Mr. Desjardins.
Yeah, it's just short and sweet. I agree with his statements for sure.
My question is for the Chief. Now, there is a resolution that stipulates that the members of the Nation of Nachla would have Métis status on those lands. You also said that the MNO are not constitutional equals. Could you please elaborate on that?
As far as our position is, First Nations, Indigenous peoples are the only rightful owners within our treaty territories.
A question for Mr. Desjardins. About 2 weeks ago, you met with the Minister regarding your opposition to Bill C-53. You encouraged the Minister to go back to the drawing board and undertake adequate consultation. What kind of consultative process should there be?
Well, I think what has to happen, even now, you guys give us 6 minutes. I think what has to happen is we should be involved from the beginning. If you want to talk about reconciliation, you have to involve First Nations people. And I think sometimes our trust is taken advantage of as First Nations people. I talked about it, a peace and friendship treaty. You know what? And we talk about the resources. Yet First Nations are the poorest people on this country yet. It's 2023 and there's still boil water advisory, just to give an example. But I think you have to engage First Nations and actually have some of their input involved in these bills.
Earlier, Mr. Desjardins, you referred to honouring the treaty at all times, otherwise it would be divisive. Could you elaborate on that, please?
Well, I think we have to start somewhere. I'm glad that you're hearing me, because you know what? Again, NRTA, unilaterally done. Our people were not included. That's almost 100 years ago. First Nations are part of the solution here in this country. We were never the problem. And now, you know what? That Section 35 is full of victories. So I think that we have to go back to honoring the treaty and working together and listening to us what we're trying to say, and not using the AFN, because it doesn't work for all. Us treaty Indians, we try and uphold treaty, not for just us, but for all of Canada. And we really need to be heard. And sometimes our 46 votes in Alberta are not being heard.
Aussi,
So, as far as treaties are concerned, you referred to the Bay James Treaty too. What's the difference between your treaty and the Bay James Treaty, please?
Yeah, as far as Ottawa, 8 of our communities are within the James Bay Treaty number 9. In fact, the communities were signers to the Treaty number 9 in 1905.
All right, we're out of time on this round, and so we'll now go to Ms. Edlut for her 6 minutes of questions. Ms. Edlut, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and also the witnesses. I thank you. Your statements are very important to us. I have a question for both of you. If you can both answer this question, I would appreciate it. Now, if you were to get self-government, can you go forward even without the land claims settlements? Without land, I'm sorry.
Greg?
Yeah, I think we already made a treaty, and if it was upheld, you look at the natural resources, you look at forestry, you look at the oil and gas, you look at the mines and the minerals, and if those were paid to the First Nations, would be more self-sufficient would be the word. Not, I don't know about self-government, because we're set up to fail.
I think I will repeat my question. I don't think it was clear enough. Can you move forward with self-government or self-governance even without land?
Yeah, you cannot have a government without land.
David?
Definitely. Repeat what he said. You cannot have self-government with the land. You gotta have the land, the resources, everything within your, as we had previously from our ancestors.
My other question is, there is in terms of UNDRIP, pertains to our rights as Indigenous peoples. Now, do the Métis fall under this UNDRIP? Greg or David, if you can respond to my question, please. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll take a stab at that, David. I think the Métis, they fall under Canada. The First Nations fall under UNDRIP.
David?
As far as Matawa concerned, that First Nations should be concerned, as well as the Inuit, about the UNDRIP. It's not is not what we see as being the right way moving forward.
My last question is, why can the Métis not be supported by UNDRIP? Why cannot their rights be under UNDRIP?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the original definition, that the people that were here at the time of contact, the treaty peoples.
First Nations and Inuit people are the original inhabitants, as we stated in our brief, that the original inhabitants and the landholders of this land here.
Okay, thank you. So colleagues, we're at the end of one round. Normally we would finish at 5:30 because of our late start. We do have resources until 6. We could do part of the second round, 5 minutes, 5 minutes, 2.5, 2.5. Does the committee want to do one more round? We're good. Okay. Okay. So we'll go to our Conservatives and Mr. Vidal. You're going to. Oh, Mr. Viersen. Okay. The floor is yours for 5 minutes.
5 minutes. Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I want to thank the witnesses for being here. I'm going to go to Mr. Desjardins first here. Just around, what do you think that this bill puts in place? It's not necessarily clear to me. There seems to be several levels of government in terms of, like, you have a treaty partner. You have, on the Indigenous side, you have the AFN, and then you may have something down to, say, like a community association. Now, the Government of Canada wants to enter into a relationship with a number of bodies across the country here. Where would you peg Bill C-53 placing the Métis Nation of Alberta, for example, in that kind of hierarchy of self-government?
I just want to say that it's going to muddy the waters more in Alberta. If treaty members live off the reserve, where do they fall under? If the Métis people live off the settlements, you're creating the Métis Nation. So I think that you're asking me where they fall under. I guess it would be a fourth level of government.
I'm not sure if it was you or David that mentioned around the AFN. Would this bill kind of be creating a Métis AFN idea? Would that be your understanding of the bill? And then I guess there's all the interesting things around the AFN's role in governance in Canada as well. So you want to comment on that, Greg, a little bit?
Well, I think it would be creating another level of government. And it's hard for us to accept and to understand when we're not given the respect that we deserve as the First Peoples. And I shared before, our 46 votes ain't enough at that table, the AFN table. We get outvoted. I've seen treaty resolutions get trumped by the AFN Charter, which is an arm of the government there.
So would you say that this bill could be putting in place like a Métis level AFN, essentially? Is that kind of your intuition on this?
Well, that would be my intuition, but I would ask the government that question.
Okay. David, I think it was you that mentioned the AFN. Do you want to just elaborate a little bit on that?
No, I didn't mention the AFN at all. It wasn't mentioned.
Okay.
Say about the AFN, it's merely an administrative organization as far as we're concerned.
Just was wondering what's the temperature doing like up in your part of the world, and what is the general mode of heating your homes in your communities?
Well, I mean, within our First Nations in Treaty Number 9 territory, communities that are remote, primarily wood heating furnaces that we have. So you can imagine the price of hydro is very high, and we don't use it for heating at all.
We're just wondering if you've got a carbon tax exemption, and would you be interested in that up in your part of the world?
Great question. No, absolutely not. No, not at all. No.
Are you negotiating with the federal government for a carbon tax exemption in your area?
That's a good question.
Send me the clip when it's done,
please. We are fairly off topic from the intent of this meeting, which is to study Bill C-53, but
so you've seen an opportunity, and
absolutely,
I took the opportunity.
And there's 30 seconds left, so if you can answer within that amount of time.
Has a quick question.
That's okay if they're not.
Yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much for appearing here today, David and Greg.
Okay, thank you. We'll stop there and go over to have Mr. McLeod next. So when you're ready, Mr. McLeod, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses here today. I really appreciate that you've taken the time to come to talk to us. This is a very difficult subject. I come from the Northwest Territories, and we've had lots of discussions around Métis self-governance and Dene self-governance, and in some cases.
Monsieur le Président, point d'ordre.
On a point of order, Mr. Chairperson. Unfortunately, there's no longer any interpretation. The service was interrupted because of the sound quality.
Non. Elle dit qu'elle comprend pas.
The interpreter said that she could no longer understand.
Mr. McLeod, can you just give us a quick sound check? Give us a quick weather report where you're at, and we'll make sure that we have the sound, and then I'll continue the clock.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Michael McLeod from Northwest Territories. Beautiful fall day. I have a headset allocated by the House of Commons. Testing 1, 2, 3. Hello, hello.
Mr. McLeod, it's the clerk. Is there any way you could increase your volume on your computer that would increase the volume of your, ostensibly of your microphone? I don't know if you could go into settings.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing.
Okay, can you bring the boom on the microphone a little bit more forward?
How's that?
The interpreter is giving me, yes. Okay, they need more sound from you. So, do you know any ghost stories?
My sound is right to the max, and my microphone is just about down my throat. I don't know if I could go any louder than that.
Okay, I have the thumbs up. We're good to go. Thank you, sir. I'm so sorry. Thanks for your patience.
Okay, and you have 4.5 minutes left. The clock is back running.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you again to the presenters. This is a very sensitive subject. I come from Northwest Territories, and we have 15 sets of negotiations going on, some with the Dene, some with the Métis, and several negotiating tables involve both. And, I grew up hearing about the treaties, hearing how sacred they are, and many elders view it as an agreement, peace and friendship agreement between two countries. But I also, I'm very aware and hear on a regular basis that the Métis also signed agreements. So, Chief Desjardins, I wanted to just talk a little bit, get you to talk a little bit about your Treaty 6 First Nations and their goals and how they want the treaty to be respected. But also, they want the right, you guys want the right to self-determination to be honored and to be respected. Could you just tell me how that is different from what the Métis are asking?
Well, I just want to say that it's pretty hard to be First Nations in Alberta because it seems like we're not recognized by the province. It's like another, God rest his soul, a Jordan Anderson again, because we're bounced between jurisdiction. You know what? Our common goal is to have clean, safe drinking water with no mold, having an economy with people working, addiction-free nations, and utilizing our resources to have ambulances. Some of our communities don't even have ambulances. It's 2023. So, like I said, First Nations have always been part of the solution. We were never the problem, and I think that's the goal of self-determination. And we never surrendered our resources. You know, I said it was unilaterally accomplished back in the 1930s. You think the First Nations would do that? I don't think so. But anyway, that's what it is. Being able to stand on our feet in alcohol, free, meth-free reserves, practicing our sacred ceremonies, and not being thrown in jail for doing that. That would be kind of like self-determination, I think.
Okay, yeah, thank you. I think all of us that are Indigenous and non-Indigenous strive to have healthy communities with healthy people in it. I totally hear you, and I sense the emotion on the subject of being treated with respect and to be treated honorably and to be treated fairly, and history hasn't shown that. Is that part of what is making it difficult for you to accept that the Métis would have any type of rights, so that because of the situation that your band is in or your tribe is in, or has been in, and how they've been treated?
Well, I think, that Canada should make all the wrongs right first. And my fear is when I'm cranky, you'll just go to the Métis and ask for consultation on my land and my projects. You know what? We forgot, and I'm going to say it. The First Nations were here. Then came the foreigners, the settlers, and then came the Métis. We forgot about all this, and that's the way it is. And if nobody teaches it, I'll share that. And it is some of the apprehension from my nation, because I see a huge problem coming down the road.
Well,
okay, Mr. McLeod, I'm going to have to jump in. We just reached the end of the 5 minutes, so we're going to need to go to our next one. So we're going to go to Madame Berube for 2 minutes, 30 seconds. 2 minutes, 12 seconds.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Mr. Desjardins, you said that C-53 would affect two levels of government. Do you think that the interests of the First Nations and the demands of the Métis are pitted against each other in any way?
Like I said earlier, about the projects in our area, the resources, the land, and so forth. They are. It's a divisive document, and it may not directly saying there, but that's what's going to happen.
Puis quelle position?
And what would your stance have been had the consultative process taken place before C-53 was drafted in the first place? What would you have thought about that?
You know, like I said earlier, you have to talk to the First Nations. And I think that's important, you know, that we have our input involved and transcribed in these documents. And there probably wouldn't be as much pushback if the First Nations were being heard.
Qu'est-ce qu'en pense le...
And Chief Matawat, what do you think of that?
I certainly totally agree with what my friend is saying. So we are both treaty people, and you know, as far as we're concerned, within our land, we were the original inhabitants of the land, and we are still there. And look at, for example, water. One of our communities is over 30 years on boiled water. You think any community municipality in Canada would put up with that? No, they wouldn't. So deal with First Nation issues first. Otherwise, you're not dealing with anything. You're completely messing up the First Nations again, over and over. Deal with us. We're willing to work with you.
Okay, we're going to stop there and go to Ms. Idlut, who will have the last 2.5 minutes in this round. So, Ms. Idlut, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, what you are stating here is always a struggle for us Indigenous people, for Inuit and First Nations. We have been put through real hardships, and that is so true. Now, the Métis people have also had similar struggles and hardships as we have suffered. When our rights are mentioned in Canada, it means all people. It means Inuit, First Nations, and Métis. In that consideration, it seems that Métis rights should also be honored. I understand what you are saying, and I know it's been a struggle. But living in peace and working together, if we were to continue work together again, if the bill was passed, would you be willing to work together alongside with the Métis Nations as well? Thank you.
You know, we didn't create the issue about Métis. You know, there was within the act, they had the enfranchisement, woman losing status when they married a non-Indigenous person. That's where the Métis issue came about within our area. So we're not, you know, it's up to Canada to resolve in another way this Métis issue. But don't use First Nations again as being the, you know, there again you're putting the fault on First Nations if this Métis bill C-53 does not come about. We're not the ones at fault. It's the government of Canada, and you got to resolve it yourself.
Okay, thank you. We're at the end of the time there, and we're almost at the end of our meeting time today. So I'd like to thank both of our witnesses for this panel for your testimony, for your insights from your perspective. I know that Chief Desjardins, you had mentioned the time restrictions, and it is a pretty rigid process, and I apologize for that. I think you'd mentioned that we do receive or can receive briefs, so if you have additional comments to send, please submit them to the clerk. Colleagues, just on that, there is one small item. We've had a few witnesses have asked about submitting written briefs. I wasn't on the committee at the start of the session, but this committee in particular adopted a limit of 5 pages. Most committees have a limit of 10 pages for briefs, and I have had some of the witnesses ask if they could do up to 10 pages. So it is a deviation from what was adopted at the start of the session for this committee. Would we have agreement to allow witnesses to submit up to 10 pages? I'm seeing Ms. Idlut in agreement. Anyone else have any issues with that? We can get it translated. Yeah. Do you want to weigh in on it? No. Okay. It's the committee's decision, very much so. Is that you're good? Okay. This side, any comments? Okay, so we'll do for this study up to 10 pages, and we can revisit it for other studies in the future. Thank you for that, for the clarification. Colleagues, thank you so much, and now we are meeting adjourned.